If you're looking for a job, don't make these common mistakes. And in this video, I'm going to break them down for you. Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to break down some common mistakes that people make in their job search. Now, as a corporate recruiter, an HR professional, and a career coach with over 20 years of experience interviewing and hiring thousands of people into some of the world's largest and most well-known companies, I've come across my fair share of job seekers, and I see some consistent mistakes that they're making. So in this video, I'm going to break down 9 of the most common mistakes I see people repeatedly making over and over again, so that hopefully you can avoid them yourself and ultimately get to the finish line. But before we get too far into it, if you're interested in more videos just like this one directly from a corporate recruiter, make sure you hit that subscribe button and maybe you hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future posts. Without further ado, let's cover some of those mistakes. The first mistake that I see people making very consistently is with their resume. So it's right out of the gate, people not customizing their resume for the specific role that they're interested in. Generally speaking, if you're sending out a generic resume, you're not giving yourself the best chance to impress that recruiter to pick up that phone to give you a first round interview, because the likelihood of you being a great fit for that specific role is probably pretty slim. However, in your background, you might actually be a better fit than you show on paper. And so that's why we want to look at customizing our resume, because it gives us a better chance of being considered a good fit for that role and getting into that yes pile for that first round interview. And now I know a lot of people will say, I just don't have time to customize every resume. That's way too cumbersome. It really doesn't have to be that way. If you have a finely tuned resume that's really well crafted, you can generally customize a resume in about 2 to 3 minutes. So for me, when I'm customizing a resume, I have several resume versions already, and I'm choosing the resume that most closely matches the job that I'm applying to. And I'm only tweaking it probably an additional 5, maybe 10%. So it's really not that big of a deal. And if you know how to do that, you can usually do it pretty quickly. And that extra little bit of spice sometimes is enough to get you across the finish line and to get into the interview process. So I'm telling you, it is absolutely worth taking the time to customize your resume. And if you don't know how to write a resume, it's definitely a skill that you want to make sure that you learn. So don't go off hiring an expensive resume writer, because they simply won't be able to customize each and every resume for you. The second very common mistake that I see job seekers making is trying to be everything to everybody. And this is the proverbial jack of all trades, master of none. Now, this goes back to the customizing of the resume. If you have to think it from an employer's perspective, they're looking to solve a very specific business problem. And if you present yourself as the solution to all possible problems, it's actually going to make it harder for the recruiter to find that you're actually a perfect fit for their job. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but the more you put on the resume, and especially if that information is not relevant to the job that you're applying to, it actually makes it harder for you to get a phone call for that first round interview, because what you're doing is essentially burying the relevant information way down into a resume. And listen, recruiters just aren't going to take the time to go through a very wordy resume to try to find what they're looking for. And another common mistake people make is kind of related to the last one. It's using a spray and pray method of job search. So essentially, your method of job search is to go onto a job board, you update a resume, and you just shoot it out to hundreds of different employers and hope that something sticks. When you do this, you're likely not a great fit for any one of those roles. Your chances of success are pretty slim. And yes, you might get an interview or two from this method, but is that job truly a good fit for you and will help move your career forward? And I'm willing to bet that it's not. The next major mistake that I see, and this one is really common, is that you don't know what you're truly worth. So you enter into an interview process and you've not done the research to know what your job is worth on the open market and what your skill set suggests is the proper level for you. And while yes, I'm a proponent of salary transparency in the job posting, it's still up to you to know what your value is so that you can pitch it correctly to an employer. Because somebody who has authority and command of their career is not waiting for an employer to tell them what they're worth. They're telling the employer what their services cost. And I want you to listen really carefully to what I just said, because it's a shift in a mentality. A defensive job seeker gets upset when an employer doesn't disclose a salary range, whereas the superstar candidate doesn't care about what the salary is, because if a certain company can't afford them, they're simply moving on to the next opportunity. And most importantly, they stand firm in that, and they know what their realistic value is on the open market. So they're not overshooting themselves or undershooting themselves. And I want to underline this for those of you who might get triggered by what I'm about to say. It is not the employer's job to tell you what your value is. It's your job to know what your worth is and to find an employer who properly values it. And that's what acting like a free agent is. We need to put ourselves into the driver's seat and become the CEO of our career. Because listen, nobody else is going to do it for you. And if you wait for an employer to determine what your value is, you're only going to end up with a lowball offer. All right, so I'll get off my soapbox here and I'll move on to the next one, which is not being prepared, because people routinely go into interviews without doing any level of prep. And it absolutely boggles my mind. If you've ever gone into an interview just deciding to wing it, you're playing with fire, especially if it's a job that you really want. And it really doesn't take all that much effort to prepare, but there are some base level things that you should absolutely be doing. Number one, checking out their website and knowing exactly what kind of business they do. And number two, knowing which division you're going to be supporting or where the role fits in the organization. Number three, you should know who the hiring manager is and some key members of that team. Number four is you should know what product or service that company offers and why it's a big deal in the market. And of course, you should be preparing for what is likely to be asked of you in an interview, both behavior-based questions and technical competencies. Now, of course, we've already talked about salary, and that's another component to all of this. But walking into an interview when you're truly prepared will give you a high sense of confidence. It's going to give you the best chance of ending up with that offer at the end. So don't take this one lightly. Make sure you come in prepared. Now, the next common mistake that I see job seekers making is putting the brakes on their job search when they make it to the final rounds of an interview with a single company. If this is you and you feel like things are going great in your final interview, the hiring manager is saying all the right things, you're getting all the warm feels from this particular company, and you're thinking you're a shoo-in for that job, it can be very easy to pull the foot off the gas and think that you got this one in the bag. But that's where the danger comes in. Can't tell you how many times I've had a candidate going through an interview process that we felt really good about, only to find out at the very last minute something changes and we end up hiring somebody completely different. Whether it was a candidate that came into the process late, maybe it was an employee referral that popped up, internal person throws their name in the ring at the very last minute, or we have multiple candidates that are really strong. So you can feel really good about a job interview, but that doesn't guarantee that you're going to end up with an offer at the end. Until you have an offer letter in your hands, you should absolutely be going 100% on your job search. Because as you start to build up your pipeline of interviews, you're going to have some that are going to be at the very early stages, you're going to have some that are in the middle, and some at the late stages. And if you stop feeding that funnel because you feel really good about a final interview you're in, if something happens there, suddenly you're not going to have anything in your pipeline, and it could take you weeks or even months to get back to where you were. So always keep the top of your interview funnel full until you have an executable offer in hand. So the next common mistake that I see people making is not learning from their mistakes. So as you go through an interview process and you get rejected, there's some learning opportunities there. Try to reflect where it possibly went wrong. Maybe you didn't build good rapport with the interview team, or maybe the behavior-based interview questions threw you off, or perhaps it was a technical assessment that you just didn't perform well on. But knowing where you went wrong will help you to adjust so that you can avoid those same mistakes going forward. Because like the old adage, if you're doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result, that's the definition of insanity. The next major mistake that I see people making is not nurturing their networks. A lot of times people will treat their networks as a necessary evil, or they'll only connect with people that they used to work with. So their networks tend to be very weak and non-productive. And inevitably, people get a bad taste in their mouth about it and say, networking doesn't work. It's because you're doing it wrong. And I firmly believe networking is one of the most important things that you can be doing in your job search. And that means going beyond your traditional networks and finding people who can actually help you when you need it. And if you're somebody that's completely neglected your networks and you don't really know where to start, I actually created a course called Unlocking LinkedIn, which teaches you how to build those solid networks so that you can actually skip people like the recruiter altogether and move right into the interviewing process. Trust me, it's way easier to get hired that way than trying to get me to notice you through a job application. Final common mistake that I see people making is only using one method for their job search. And let's face it, for most people, your job search probably looks like you update a resume and you go out to a job board and you apply to a few positions, which in and of itself is kind of ironic because we talked about not being a jack of all trades. And here you're being a little too specific. We actually want to be the jack of all trades whenever we're doing our job search. So make sure you're tapping into your networks and growing them with like-minded people that can help move your career forward. Of course, you're going to be applying to jobs on a variety of job boards. I made videos about the best job boards that you can be using, so you should check that out. And what's wrong with reaching out directly to a company that you're interested in working for and approaching them the direct way? People used to do it all the time back in the day. Nowadays, it seems to be a lost art form. And listen, there's plenty of ways to look for jobs besides the traditional go onto a job board and apply for an open post. Let's try to mix it up and use multiple points of attack, and you'll have a better result in your job search. All right, so hopefully some of these help if you're in an active job search and you're wondering why you're not having the success that you think you should be having. But if you're still struggling, that's actually something that I specialize in. I've got a website called lifeafterlayoff.com, and it's loaded with tips and tricks, all from an insider's perspective. I've got some of my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses. I already mentioned the Unlocking LinkedIn course that you can check out, but I also teach you how to write those resumes that you can customize, and that's through Resume Rocketfuel. Once you get into the interview process, it's up to you to sell yourself throughout the rest of the process in order to get that dream offer, and that's where the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp comes in. Think of it as interview training. We take you through each step and give you tips, tools, and techniques in order to ace those interviews and ultimately land that offer. So if you're in need of help, I highly recommend you check them out. And if you need some more individualized attention, I do offer some limited private one-on-one coaching sessions. You can check out my website for that. I'll leave the links all below. Hopefully this video was of some value to you. Happy job hunting, and we will see you on the next one.